Okay, so let's kick it off. In order of attendance, Mike, thank you for showing up early. Would you give us the 5-minute background of you, Tiki, and a little bit of your startup journey?
Sure. Yeah. So we work on what we call consumer data licensing infrastructure. And so probably the easiest way to think about it is data and data privacy and ownership all comes down to rules of who owns what, who's allowed to do what, who's given permission to do what with it. An analogy to this would be like music licensing. So we basically allow businesses and people to license data from one another, like you would license music royalty rights. So when a business uses your data, you can get paid for it. They can offer you discounts off purchases. You as a user can contribute data for AI purposes or access to certain features. And so we build this as infrastructure similar to like a Stripe type of layer. So if you're a business who is reliant on data from consumers, you can roll out really cool programs that both you and your users love. And so this drives brand loyalty through the roof for businesses, but also gets them access to data they couldn't have in ways that are super ethical and super transparent and people love. And so we build that as tech at an infrastructure level for developers to use. And so my background is obviously in data and infrastructure. So prior to this, I built another big data company called Bluestream, where we use data to build AI systems for Fortune 500 brands to maximize loyalty and advocacy of really product-driven companies for users. And so my background's data. We're based in Nashville, Tennessee, and we build infrastructure to help people and businesses better interact and transact data on the internet in non-creepy, non-invasive, the future, really ways that make the world a net positive place as opposed to a net negative place.
And with the data background, you're also a serial entrepreneur, correct?
Yeah. So second startup, first one, data, second one, data, technical founder. I was a former CTO. Now I'm CEO. No CTO in this one.
All right. Thank you very much. Siu, you are up next. Give us a little bit about your founder journey, your current startup and or past startups, and a bit of the background.
Okay. Aloha, I'm Siu. Currently, I run a blog as I'm on sabbatical and traveling full-time after dissolving my mental health tech startup that was focused on male mental health. I worked on that for about 4.5 years, dissolved it last August of 2022. And yeah, so on sabbatical now, and actually birthing a project called EAT Wellness Hostel, so emotional architecture for travelers. And my background is I was once a therapist. I worked in neuroscience research at a university in California for many years. Then I made the jump to tech, where I worked in tech sales, moved up to director of West Coast sales, and then founded Kilo, which was the mental health tech startup I had. Ryan has talked to me many times in many different countries. So if you have any questions about traveling and working, I can also answer those as well. What I will say is I was a non-technical founder, and I will be again.
Yeah, this is one of the pieces of enthusiasm I have for this particular event is the backgrounds we've put together are both one, like Mike is in the middle of I'm guessing your post Series A-ish or something like that company. We've got a company that was dissolved. We've got a company traveling and remote. We've got, technical backgrounds, data backgrounds and whatnot. So there should be some really interesting compare and contrast things with these journeys. And again, thank you for sharing your stories. Skylar, you are up next.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ryan. My name is Skylar Van Sickle, and I'm the CEO of XR Goods Company. And what we do is we bring a digital layer to physical goods. Behind me you can kind of see some of our t-shirts that we have. Basically, we have IP around multiplying barcodes for scannability, which we put on t-shirts, and we've created a kids line, apparel line that goes into like museums and gift shops and museums, aquariums, things like that. And we also have a fan merch line where we work with influencers, NFT communities, and other digital communities on creating fan merchandise that allows each other to identify each other in real life more readily, and then access each other in those unique metaverses, if you will, on a large scale. and got a background, non-technical, but have had to learn how to talk to the technicals. This is not my first startup. I've had a few before this. This one I've been running for about a year now. We're still pre-seed, but moving really quickly now that the team is in place. So
awesome. All right. So, and all of you have had co-founders, have co-founders, and I'm sure there's many different branching paths on that. So I'm going to jump into kind of what that journey actually looked like. So let's start with the current or most recent startup. So Mike, for you is Tiki, Kilo, and the one you're actively running, Skylar. Mike, what is your co-founder story with Tiki? Because Tiki is what you said, 4 years in, maybe more?
We're 2 years in.
2 years in.
2 years in. Yep. So when I went to, I left my last startup post Series A, right after we raised our Series A. Actually, I decided that I was going to leave and start Tiki. We can get into why, but that's kind of irrelevant to how I had to find founders. But because I left the business that I co-founded as the CTO for both ethics reasons, but also I didn't want to screw them up. I was just not going to bring anyone I knew with me, but I was the founder and CTO of that last business. And so all my friends were like, their families and them were investors in the company. They worked there. Everybody I had known, all my professional relationships, every business, every company and everyone I had ever worked with was all somehow in that thing. They were either customers or investors or employees or users, right? Like it was, I brought them all in. And so when I left, I was very much like, I'm going to go start this thing. I know that I need a co-founder. I'm a big believer in surrounding yourselves with people who are like diametrically opposed almost to you. I think it's very important to find people who have all the skills you don't have. And being a technical, founder, I have a very specific set of skills, but I also have a very specific type of personality and way I talk and message things and resonate. And, when we started Tiki, it was about building a community of people outside of there. And so I wanted people who came from a different understanding and background and brought a different thing to the table. And so what we ended up doing, I made a really terrible video. I mean, as terrible can get, because I'm, that is definitely not my skill set. And it was like one of those things where like a character walks on the side of the screen and they're just like talking and it's like, here's my idea. I would like some people to do this with me. And I put it on AngelList. And so I made a video. It was like 2 minutes long of like, here's roughly the idea of this company I want to start. And I just threw it up on AngelList with a whole bunch of different openings for types of co-founders I'd be open to starting the business with. And so I listed like 7 or 8 different types of co-founders, put the video up on AngelList, and 600 people applied to start the company with me.
Really? That is,
yeah.
And that's literally starting ground zero because you couldn't tap your existing professional network.
Yep, exactly. I did not want to tap my network. And so I started completely from ground zero and that was it. I put it out there and started interviewing. And I had specific things I was looking for, but also I was just very open. I think I interviewed 60, 70 people and picked a couple different people. So I didn't pick one co-founder. I actually picked a few different co-founders to start. I have a big belief that it's all fixable. That's how I approach building a company. Just try it, just start getting going. That's like always my biggest piece of advice for anyone who's like, how do I find a co-founder? Or they're worried about basic things like even how do I set up an incorporation? I'm like, it's all fixable. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about it. Just start, right? Set up some stock, set up some options, get started, see how it is, right? It's impossible to know until you're months into working with someone. How are you supposed to know if they're the right fit, really? Like, I don't care how many times you interview them. You're never going to know until you get into it.
Just start working together.
Yeah. And so, I picked a few different ones that I thought could be there with me along the way. And ultimately, one of them made it all the way to where we are now.
How big did you start with in terms of the founding team? And it sounds like it winnowed down to 2 after 2 years.
It widowed down to just me and a co-founder. And so I had 2 other co-founders at the begining. So there were 4 of us. And there's 2 of us. So I added 3 co-founders with the expectation at least one of them would fall out. 2 of them fell out as we went along. And so that's and it's totally normal. It's all fixable and it's all doable. And some of those went amicably, and some of those did not go amicably. That's just like part of building a business and life. But yeah.
And this is why vesting schedules are very important on your common stock grants, because things don't work out. Plan for uncertainty, disruption, etc. That's awesome. I'm going to put a pause on that one because I want to get a couple more of the stories, and then I think we'll interrelate. CEO, what was your co-founder experience with Kilo?
Very different than Mike's, which is what I love about humanity. So I was solo for 3.5 years, but I met my co-founder at a powerlifting gym in Los Angeles, two women doing powerlifting. And I started telling her about the idea for Kilo in early 2020, and I had already founded as a C Corp through Gust. They didn't ask me to share that, but and
we did not pay anybody for the participation.
Nope. And I started chatting with her about branding, and she had a successful cannabis company with just really dope branding that I appreciated. So she helped me on that journey, and we worked really well together. And then she came on board in 2021, writing some copy content for the app. And we worked really well together. She worked as a contractor for Kilo for 1 year. And then after I launched the app, got feedback, I was like, honestly, in a slump. I was like, where do I go from here? I'm doing all of this work by myself. I was a bit overwhelmed. And she was like, can I be a co-founder? I have this new brand, this Japanese B-movie inspired monsters that she was going to use for a candy company, and it just fit really well. So I was like, it was a no-brainer when she asked me. So that was January of 2022. And we were both non-technical. And we found that, well, I found rather that earlier in the journey, I just met some really great engineers who could actually build. And that was really helpful. So that's how she and I met. Very different than Mike's journey, but so cool in that way.
Again, part of the points of like these longer term relationships where Mike almost bootstrapped, relationships, almost playing it as a numbers game in terms of let's get, enough people involved in this thing and start to build the relationships by working together. While you've got, somebody that was adjacent to your own efforts, as a solo founder for so long, but then it just made sense. And like that metaphor I use about a relationship is a lot of time, my partner and I, my non-co-founder, but my actual like partner that I live with, our relationship started with a question one day of like, would we ever date? And the answer was like, well, maybe. And, we'd known each other for quite a long period of time as friends. And after that, so very interesting how that human element of the relationship can pan out. I got tons of additional questions, but Skylar, I want to give some fair play. I think your co-founder relationship is even more interesting and close to home. So let us know what the journey is for you.
Yeah, I've had several different co-founder experiences. This company actually kind of transitioned out of the last project I was working on. In the last project, I had a single co-founder. It wasn't a great co-founder match for a market, so that one actually dissolved. But as we were building that one, I got in contact basically with one of the co-founders I have right now. We have two different co-founders. You could say five in a way, but really like three executive, you could say co-founders. The other two are my parents. I moved in during COVID, and this idea actually kind of like came out of an interaction I had with my dad. And my mom and my dad are actually out selling t-shirts at farmers markets, like all this crazy stuff. So they're very much participating, but we have three active like executive co-founders, you could say. A CMO, a CTO, and I am the CEO and COO. The first co-founder, Tate, he's our CMO. I actually interned for him like back in college, so like over 10 years ago. And when I was working on the previous project, I put out a blast to my network that I hadn't talked to in 10 years, actually. And he was like, I got a good return rate on the message, but he was the only one that really stuck through it. And what really with him, like the first call that we got on, and I told him what we were working on, and I said, hey, I got this meeting with this person, and it's tomorrow. And he goes, well, what time? Let me see if I can make it. And just like off the first talk, so like he just showed up like right away. I'd never experienced anything like that. That was amazing. In the past, it's always felt like I've had to convince people. And then Tom, actually, our CTO, he's sitting right here with us. He's been with us for 6 months now, and found him on Upwork. We build AR, and we were looking for people that could really do that, and I'd gone through quite a few of them, and we just really started working well together in a contractor role, and then actually invited him out here last summer for an event we had, and after that he was sold on it and came on as our CTO. That's where we're at right now, and we've just started giving out some advisory shares here and there for bringing on an advisory board, as well as some early, call it employees, non-co-founders. So we're kind of moving to that next stage of things as well.
So that kind of resonates with what Mike was talking about, like the classic, like it takes a village, where it's like when you think about co-founders, there's these, you hear these stories about, the two Google co-founders, and it's like, it seems like it's all about just those two people and they're making all the magic happen and everybody else is just a participant or contributor. But it sounds like both Mike and Skylar, you literally interviewed for the role of co-founder. So you both did like cold outreach. And I can start with you, Mike, in terms of running that interview process. What are you actually looking for? Like, how do you, because it's not, you're not like, oh, do you have 5 years experience of developing Ruby on Rails, or like, have you run a sales pipeline before? You spoke before about like filling in your own gaps, but what did that actually look like? Yeah.
And so I'd start with, you're actually not just looking for a co-founder at that point. At least most of the time when I've been hiring at that stage, you're looking for the founding team, right? So there are there's the co-founder, and then there's the founding team. And there are different types of roles and different types of players. And so I was looking for where people could fit. And the first thing I'm looking for is alignment in mission and value, right? So do they believe in the same North Star? Are they in it for the same reasons as I'm in it, right? Being a very mission-led business, I needed a co-founder who saw the same North Star, because it's going to be a messy road from start to finish, right? So step one was finding people who believed in the thing that I believed in for the same reason I believed in it. And that's hard to sniff out, right? And so it's a weird type of way of interviewing and trying to get to know somebody. But that's ultimately what I was looking for, was how authentic they were, how much they cared about this, why they wanted to do this, why they were willing to take such a crazy risk on something that at that point was nothing more than an idea, right? It wasn't like it existed in even the most basic form. It was just a concept. And so that was what I was looking for. And then I started with what skills am I missing that are most important to have to solve this problem? Right. So if you start looking at the North Star, you start looking at data. A big problem with data is it's always sold in like this sketchy, non-transparent way, in ways that people can't understand and people can't get behind, and it's not clear. And so if you want it to be clear and concise and communicative, and you want users to know about what's going on and how do you build trust, becomes all about communication. And so communication as an engineer is not my strong suit. Particularly in how do you frame things and communicate things that are easy to understand, easy to adopt and build on top of. And so I was looking for people who are experts in communication. And so that tells you a few different types of roles and experiences that you're looking for, right? And, people who have strong leadership in CX, no brainer, right? They spend all day long interacting with people, trying to understand their problems, how to understand that, turn that into product features and fixes and all of that, right? So CX, people who are build and design consumer-facing products, right? So they build products for end consumers. Again, experts in communication through graphics and imagery and what the buttons should be and the colors and the text used, right? And so once you start to identify what the most critical skill sets are that you are lacking that are needed to solve the problem, then that started to paint a picture. And so I started to put different types of roles and responsibilities around that. And then that's what I went out looking for was, okay, people with these skill sets, they probably roughly have these, they intrinsically are good at things that I'm not.
Oh, I really like especially in the early days, is like tying it to the vision and really being bought in, because I think everything in a startup, if you're viewing it as like a compartmentalization of your career growth, as in like, oh, am I going to become staff engineer of this, or oh, am I going to, is this going to level me up so I can go interview at, X new company, or is this, the known career path, is often not a good fit for founding team members. You are literally having to be kind of in love with the idea of what the company's trying to do, because things are going to get tough. Like, and you're going to have to, nobody's going to have all the skill set. You're going to have to expand your skill set. You're going to have to do things. I write HubSpot emails. I never thought in my life I would write HubSpot emails. I was an engineer, like caring about, branding and understanding how Google Ads works and things like that. These are areas that I never thought I would touch. And there's no expertise within the company at the time when we had to learn those kind of things. So really finding it's like, you will do whatever it takes within ethical bounds and reasons and whatnot to actually make it a success. So that's running an interview process. I want to know, when you're at the powerlifting gym, when you're not openly interviewing for the role, but you're finding it more serendipitously, like how does that conversation even start? As one, love out to I love powerlifting myself. So it is one of I've actually met a lot of friends through that. Was kind of interesting to hear that resonate. It's like, oh, I have like a lifelong friend that I met just literally at a gym where we used to live. So it's not actually surprising to me at all that you might find a co-founder there, because surprisingly, I found myself talking business, not business like, at the squat rack, like, hello, I'm, crushing my TPS reports, but just like being interested in somebody's life. So how did that kind of net out, CO?
Yeah, so we both obviously chose to put ourselves in a very male dominated space. So we had a love and a lot of compassion for the men around us. And Kilo, just as a reminder, was a male focused mental wellness app. And I think we met in 2019. So that was a year before around the time I had the idea for Kilo, but I hadn't shared it with her yet. And then when I decided to incorporate and start building the brand, I met up with her for a coffee and I was pitching it to her. And I said, remember this so clearly. I said, like, one day Justin Bieber is going to be on this app, because at the time he was talking a lot about his wellness and hyperbaric chambers, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, I know that sounds crazy, but I'm crazy. And like, yes, I'm a woman who's very interested in like the wellness of men. And she was like, that's dope. And I was like, I need help with this. And can I show you the deck I'm putting together? Like, branding is not my strong suit. So Mike was also saying, like, looking for people that have the magic that you don't have as a founder, and recognizing the areas that I wasn't as strong in. And she's like, okay, I'm going to come over. And we started working out in my house together, because then Corona was sweeping through the globe. So we started doing our like at-home workouts together. And then we would do branding for like an hour before or after. And then that evolved into us keeping in touch. And then I offered her the contractor job to write the content, because her content was so spot on for the cannabis company that she was writing for.
I think that's
I will say,
go ahead.
go ahead. I will say
No.
one add-on is like, sometimes as founders, we are told like, keep your idea under wraps. And for me, I was telling it to anyone and everyone I could. I was like, I'm doing this. And like, and if the person's ears, perked up and their pupils dilated and their body language shifted, I was like, do you want to know more? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. And I'd be like, what are your skills? Like, tell me what they are. And so that really led me to some fantastic relationships along the way.
That is an excellent point. Something that we've beat down a lot. In Gust Launch, there's NDAs. Sometimes people get like really excited by NDAs, being like, I'm going to send NDAs to everybody. But we constantly say, like, your NDAs are for vendor relationships. When you're signing, you're establishing a relationship between a vendor where you're going to share data and things like that. Investors, co-founders, and all those kind of things. Startup ideas are everywhere. The ideas themselves are not worth that very much absent the execution, absent the founding team, absent the momentum. So I think two parts of that is, one is like sharing your vision and finding when people have legitimate, authentic interest, and also being authentic yourself. Neither Mike nor Zio's approach sounds like you were like hard pitching people to be like, come be my superstar co-founder, blah blah blah. It's like, no, you're sharing like, I have weaknesses, like I want to make this thing exist, and like I need help, like my branding isn't where I want it to be. Like one of the best things I heard in my former life in art school was like, the skills that you were born with are not, will always improve. So what you sketched in freshman year as opposed to senior year are going to be very different, but it's the taste that, you can identify, like, I'm not happy with this. I can't produce any better, but I'm not happy with it. And sharing that authentic, needing help while also aligning on the vision. It's a very different relationship than, just hiring somebody or whatnot. Let's make this cold and cynical. And some of the questions in the audience, which I want to get into, is, all right, so how do you compensate people? Like, what is the minutia of this? You're asking for a co-founder. I'm going to start with Skylar and then I'll loop it back in through. When you're talking with these initial things, like, what do those conversations look like? Do these people ask for pay? Are they sweat equity only? Do you consider them on your same level? How did that go?
Well, I kind of want to like start by answering the past question of like,
oh, sure.
What kind of like relationship is it, and how does it work? And for me, it's been very natural, and it has to be very natural. Like, if I were to come out the gate swinging equity around, offering equity, here's what I'm going to do, da, 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 instead of like getting the business to where I can get it and then bringing somebody on. I think that was really important. With my past co-founder traumas, it was really important that, like I had like not only a leadership role, but a various level of control over the company. And so I've just always put myself out there, never, you can't convince somebody to do something that they don't want to do. So you can't convince a co-founder to be a co-founder. And, whether it's 1 point or 2 points of equity, it's not going to make a difference in the long run, because the co-founders, like a co-founding team needs to understand that, like, the reason you're getting together is to grow a piece of pie so that an investor can take a big chunk of it, basically. And that's how you all get paid, right? And I mean, just like it's, to try and value each other's co-founders. I mean, Tom, our CTO, I mean, he does really hard work, right? And he's, he's like, he has a full time with, he has, contracting and does all this type of stuff. And so I wanted to make sure he still gets paid and valued, and the equity agreement is like the long-term relationship. And it's up to me as the like, call it the one who started it, to maintain the relationship and make sure that he is getting what he needs, right? On the other hand, Tate, he has 2 kids and a wife. For me to bring him on board full time, it's like 120, 160 grand a year, right? And he's just putting in every hour he can on the side, not asking for pay, because he knows just as well as I do that we can't afford him. And then I have my own needs as a co-founder, right? Like, how do I maintain that? Like, well, I do have a base level, and this is, the way I've set it up, it's entirely on my shoulders. If I'm not the one waking up, pushing everybody in the morning, nothing's going to happen. But, as Tom and Tate have really started to take their own hold and make their own decisions, and me being like, I hate branding, start making decisions around this, like, I hate this work, like, do this, please. It just happens. So, it's like they also say, like, don't put titles too early. And it's like, no, you need to know exactly what titles you're looking for. Like, if you're a CEO, COO type, then you need to be looking for a CMO. And if you have that, you need to be looking for a CTO. Like, you need to give yourself enough space, and all of your co-founders enough space to grow into their role. Because as a startup, like, we pivoted 3 times, and it's about, like, each time you pivot, you lose somebody, basically. You lose traction, to start gaining traction in a better direction. And it's those co-founders who stick around through all the pivots that end up being there, and they're worth it, right? Like those are the ones that are worth it. You have to pay. Here's one last thing I like to say is like,
I know I left you alone too long.
Yeah, all founders need to be contractors at times, but not, or all entrepreneurs need to be contractors, but not all contractors are entrepreneurs, right? So there's like,
there's cut and dry services that you can just pay for, rack rate, market rate, maybe below market rate with a little bit of equity, but they're not going to join your venture as, you know, something in a co-founder role. I want to circle back to the compensation question in a second, but you brought up something really interesting that I want to see from the other panelists if they have experience in is, have any of you had the like it's not working out relationship? I think a couple of you mentioned, and how do you handle that from like specifically the tactics of just equity grants, if you had compensation associated with it, if you had those alignment conversations, and then it just turned out that they weren't. Mike, you can kick us off because you're nodding aggressively, not aggressively, nonchalant.
Yeah, I've had those in every business I've ever been involved in. And so I'm going to go so far to say you would be the outlier if you don't have that conversation at some point with someone who, you know, was important at some point. And that could be, you know, Skylar mentioned, a lot of pivots, right? And so they might have started as the right person for the role, and over time it wasn't the role that they wanted, or maybe something changed in their life, right? So one of my co-founders, like she decided she wanted to pursue a different lifestyle. So she wanted to pursue like a digital nomadic lifestyle and make it more of a on the side type of thing. And we were raising money and growing the team and hiring people, and that just wasn't like we diverted paths, and that was fine and amicable. And we put in a transition process in place, and we laid out vesting initially. And so that was a pretty seamless thing to do, to kind of have it wind down naturally over time as we winded up efforts in a different direction, right? And so that was pretty seamless. Another one was, you know, it blew up in my face. And so that also, like, that's okay. That's going to happen, right? That's part of working together. And that's actually somebody who I was friends with beforehand in a professional capacity and not a cold outreach, believe it or not. And that blew up in my face. And that was, you know, there were things that we didn't want to say to one another because of our relationship outside of it that wasn't purely professional. And so that blew, and then that kind of, it all just, that's the funny thing about emotions, they come out eventually. And so, you know, we didn't say certain things we probably should have said to one another because we are friends and we're not treating it in true professional situation, which I would have had that conversation long prior to that about who's doing what and expectations. And so clear expectations, clear guidelines, setting out what happens and being upfront with people about like, hey, this may not work out, right? I think I could have done a better job of that initially. I think I could have done a better job setting expectations, but making those things clear and what does success look like, and encouraging communication and understanding and letting everyone know it's fine, that it's going to change a lot over time. But yeah, so they've blown up. They've not. I've had the hard conversations. You're going to have them. They're never easy. They're just never easy. So the best thing you can do is set up as much of you can as in advance. Like, hey, just know if this thing goes south, this is the process. And so you go in knowing ahead of time, here's how it doesn't make the conversation easier, but it makes all the tactics around it that can get really messy a lot easier.
I think addressing the uncertainty daily, the elephant in the room that everybody's thinking about, and often in startups, like I often equate the entrepreneur's journey as like it's a frustrating duality between having to feign, traditionally in some of the more higher profile cases, having to feign absolute confidence while also being incredibly uncertain about almost everything. But if you can actually, especially with your team, if you can address that uncertainty day to day and actually do downside protection, everybody can put themselves in a better headspace where it's not, their emotional reaction isn't pinged on like everything must succeed. You can actually plan around downside protections. And like you said, nobody likes it when things don't work out, but at least it's not a complete money and surprises really, really change humans' emotions. So the interesting thing is upside scenarios I've seen with founders is like once the real money starts coming in, all of a sudden the conversations shift sometimes dramatically. And then when the money dries up, and people's, like you said, their lifestyle or like what they expected out of this, what this meant to them in their life, at the moment that might have gone unsaid, in the original things could really make it more difficult than just the tactics of like, well, how do we do what's best for us and best for the business? So what about you in terms of any kind of breakup scenarios?
Yes. Can you hear me okay? It says my internet's
Yep.
unstable. Okay.
You're coming in clear.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, when my co-founder and I separated and she shared a couple of things with me, I realized I had made a big mistake around being even more transparent about equity. So she had asked me if she could be my co-founder, like I mentioned earlier. She asked for a specific percentage, which I was comfortable with. And I had a running spreadsheet that was a cap table. That was my internal record of truth because I was solo before she came on board. And I had added her there and she had seen that, but on the Gust platform where we have allocation of shares, she was not allocated those shares there. And I was having a conversation with my interim business ops person, and we were sharing screens because I was very transparent about that, as you ought to be with your co-founders. And she was like, wait a minute, I'm not on there yet. And I didn't keep following up and being like, is this clear? Is this clear? Is this clear? Because in my head, I had my record of truth. And that really bothered her. And before we decided to separate, she shared that with me. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, that was my mistake. And so then when she was like, this isn't going to work out for me, there are a couple other things that weren't jiving for us. I was like, okay, I don't want to be solo anymore. And that's what led to my choice to dissolve Kilo. So I would just recommend that anytime you're having conversations about equity or allocating shares, to do it together and to like be like, is this clear? Is this clear? Is this clear? And make sure that it's clear.
I think that's actually a fantastic point. And this is something that came around for me. Like I said, I had a kind of a technical background in the beginning. As an engineer, you sign employment contracts all the time. You have side gigs and side jobs, and you're always like nervous about like, oh, is the company going to come and steal my blog or my side project? But you don't actually understand the essence of the other part of the contract, which is like, I am giving my service to this company. The things I develop, creative works of myself, will be owned by a company, and a traditional company. When it comes to a startup, a lot of people have never interacted with small teams like that. And most founders are very well-meaning. And like you said, they have their own source of truth and they know they're going to do the right thing, right? I'm going to give you the equity that you deserve if this works out. But like, so many other fires are burning right now. We're in an early stage company, right? We need to get the product in, we need to fundraise, we need to do all this stuff. It's like, taking care of the paperwork is like, we'll do that when we're in the success phase of this going out. But like, trust me, I'll do that. The best way to earn trust is to give somebody a document to sign that actually reflects the relationship that they're going to have with the company. And it's totally cool. Like what Skylar was saying is like, if you start with contractors, that actually provides a ton of clarity, because you can have, kind of to Mike's thing, is like, you can have the conversation around like, well, we don't know if this is going to work out. A contractor role to start with is very much an admission of like, you're not a full-time employee, you're not a co-founder, you're not signing a co-founder, IP assignment kind of thing. Like, I'm paying you maybe miserable wages or none at all, or just equity, but like, you're a contractor right now because we don't have money and we haven't proven the next phase of this company. Later on, like, maybe you will totally come on as a co-founder once it makes sense. And that will come with probably another equity grant of a more significant stake with, vesting schedules that mirrors what this relationship would be. But getting ahead of those agreements and leading with them is a really good way to kind of build trust absent your own word, which at the end of the day, your own word should be worth it. But it's a really good way to sort of build, shells of trust and transparency in the company. And it makes people are amazing. When you have hand wavy conversations with them, when you promise a certain thing, you never know what's formulating in their mind of their actual expectations of what the future is going to be. So putting that down into like, measurable kind of things like that is a really helpful way to pull everybody back down to earth. and hopefully have the more celebratory conversations like, here's your second stock grant because like things are going so well, or you're no longer a contractor, you're actually full-time on this because it's super working out.
Actually just had a conversation like that the other day, if you want.
Yeah, share it, please, if you're comfortable.
So we just brought on our newest team member, and basically we spent, the last 3 months with her, just ramping up all of our business development materials. Like, she's taken on a really great design role, been working for minimum, really going above and beyond. And we're like, all right, we want to bring you onto the team, right? And here's a stock grant, and we went through with that. But all of a sudden, like, we spent all this time ramping up, and then like we're like, okay, we don't know what's next, basically. And you're now a team member, and we don't know what's next. And so I had to really be transparent and say, hey, we got 4 months of runway. We have one client that is paying for everything right now, basically. We did the 80% work of doing all this business development prep. Now we need to get through that last 20% and start closing some deals, right? And like, that's what needs to happen before we can start paying you again. But what I need you to do is find a way to remain engaged, right? Because I know, like, the minute traction is lost, it feels like nothing's happening, right? Especially if it's somebody who's like adjacent to the core team, but starting to become a core team member and just went through a bunch of work and is now finding a downturn in the work, right? Like, finding ways to keep people engaged, that how they want to stay engaged, I think is really important.
Yeah. Definitely. And now that we're with you, Skylar, I do want to dip into your unique experience, and I think it blends a little bit to everybody's here. And we had a question in the Q&A, is personal relationships. Mike, you mentioned it, something, a friend, a family member. What are your guys' thoughts on bringing on people like that into a business venture? So Skylar, being that I think you have the largest surface area of family and or friend members, your thoughts, and then we'll go around the horn there.
Yeah. So I'll just like briefly touch on my first co-founding relationship out of college, which, we ran a successful business. It started going well. I was there every day, and I was living with one of the co-founders, and our relationship had a huge falling out, mostly over finances, which it's like everything was going well. I was the only one needing a paycheck, and he had a problem with that. And that ended up tearing the relationship apart and sent me into a world of post-traumatic stress from co-founders for like quite a while, actually. And I even tried going to networking events out of that and felt like I was going to throw up. So like, it's a very real thing. It took me like a year and a half to get a buyout between like attorneys, like negotiating. That was my first co-founder experience. Everything was going well, and then all of a sudden I get ripped out of the business.
And were you guys friends before that?
No, not.
Oh, interesting.
No. And the original co-founder I started with, who was the technical guy, I kind of came on as the operations guy. We had a mutual friend, and we, I guess the relationship wasn't strong enough. He had a full-time job. The other guy was full-time student. I was the only one full-time with this. And it was really easy for two co-founders to get together and oust the other one. So that was really hard. And my whole life was built around that one. Finally started getting to a more comfortable place and working with other people again, I guess. And this one, it's like the co-founder I had was like the ideal co-founder for that time and everything. But the project was not a project. He was somebody that knows independent music, and this was a very technical project. And so it wasn't the right fit. And there were some really, huge arguments like that took place just because like it wasn't the right fit. But luckily we've actually been able to maintain a relationship, like a friendship after that. And that's what I'm really happy about, because that first one, I haven't talked to them. So
yeah. Mike, you did mention that you knew somebody outside personally. What are your thoughts on bringing friends and or family into your startup?
Yeah, I mean, even in my first business, I started the business with my friend's father, like a really close friend's father. And so that always had a weird undertone to it. And so like the cool thing about building companies with your friends and your friends' family is awesome when it's going well, right? It's the best when it's going well. But when it goes bad, and every startup goes bad at some point, it's part of building something new, is it will inevitably get messy and complicated and hard. There are ways, if you want a nice life, there's way easier ways to make money than building a company, right? It's like you do it for reasons other than the money, and it's going to get hard. And when you don't, and so I wouldn't do that again personally. It would be very hard for me to start that, right? Like I want my co-founders to grow into becoming my best friends, right? And in my last business, many of them did, and we are very close today. And my new ones here, they're the same thing. We're very close. But the difference is you're starting at a different, like there's a different undertone that the relationship's built on top of. And there's always that, hey, when the thing, like when we need to have a professional conversation, we have the professional conversation. It's not flipped the other way where, you know, when you start a business with family or friends, it's like that comes first, the business comes second, right? Which always puts the business on a secondary note, which is, you know, not, in my opinion, the way to build a great business. That's where the business suffers, and then you end up with those blowups, right? Like it's just like, because you're placing other things at a higher priority, you're placing your personal relationship and friendship above the hard conversation you need to have around work. And then the hard conversation around work happens, it blows up, and then suddenly you're no longer friends with that person anymore. And so you lose both things because you're unwilling to prioritize the conversation you need to have. And so I find it's a lot easier if you start professional and build into really close friendships than the other way. But then, I mean, look, I've worked with family-run businesses that have been doing it for hundreds of years, and they do hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue, and the whole family's involved. And so, like, it's not like this is the only way to do it. That would be foolish. But for me, I've found that starting professional and growing into a deep friendship it allows you to have conversations that I personally avoided when it was the other way around.
Oh, it's interesting. I'm even reflecting on my relationship with Pete. Pete was actually the second engineer we hired at Gust when I joined Gust as the CTO almost a decade ago. And I go out to Tennessee. I adore Pete's family. Like they travel in here. We are close friends, but we met as coworkers, and like it definitely is established a certain kind of relationship, I guess, that I didn't actually reflect on. Sio, what about your experience? Any family or friends that you've brought into your ventures?
Well, my co-founder was once my friend. I mean, we weren't inner circle friends, I would say. We weren't close friends when we started, but that friendship definitely deepened. And across our relationship, when she worked as a contractor with Kilo and then as a co-founder, I think that we had established like a friendship first was actually very beneficial, because the way that we communicated was a layer deeper than we are just coworkers and then co-founders. I think it just depends on the relationships that you have, how you communicate with your friends. This type of dynamic may be different for each person. I have a friend now who was once my boss at the first startup I supported over 5 years ago, gosh, almost 8 years ago now. And he and I are now closest of closest friends and have been talking about partnering together on this next venture. So I don't think there's a hard and fast, like do this or do that. You really have to be good at intuiting, make that a word, yeah, intuiting your level of communication. Like if you see that there are some stumbling blocks in your communication efforts with friends, then maybe it's not the best idea to work with them. But if you feel like you have a decent, clear ability to communicate with your friends and you're like, hey, this person might be a great addition to the business, I say, why not? You have to know yourself pretty well in friendships before, or family relationships before bringing them on, I believe.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. And a different perspective to look on it is not the downside necessarily of like, well, am I going to lose the friendship? Is it worth it that much to me? But actually looking at the nature of the friendship. I have a bunch of friends in the startup space. I live in and around New York, so I meet with them all the time. The amount of times I've heard people say to me like, well, maybe we should start a company. And I have some of these friends, I'm like, never. I will never want to work with you. And it's like, what's wrong with me? And it's like, it's not it's not you, like, I'm not judging you as a person. It's just like, I know who we are as friends and what we talk about and what we take each other to task on and what we just kind of let slide because that's you, that's me, whatever. When you get into business, you can't hand wave a lot of that stuff. So based on the nature, and I think an interesting point from Mike and my own personal experience is depending on where you meet people, like in Gust and early on, we built a culture of like tremendous transparency and like very, very open one-on-ones, bring your whole self to work kind of stuff where we would have conversations that would be probably more difficult in a lot of more corporate contexts. So a lot of those initial friendships were already based on the ideas like we can have a straight up conversation about what's working and what's not, about our job, about our roles together, about disciplines, about this and that. And that started with the friendship. I have friends from all walks of life where some of it is just like, we don't get to that. We don't like dig in on like, are you telling me the full truth of this story? Or do you just want some emotional padding because you're upset about, a mutual friend conversation or whatnot? We're not going to like put it all on the table and resolve it. Like, and those kind of friendships are totally fine, but they're just different for different people, different personalities, knowing yourself, how much you want to spend. I love that perspective. Let me get to some questions because we're coming up on a time here. We got a couple of along the way.
Can I say something?
Oh yeah, sure, go.
I just want to say, and again, Gus didn't ask us to say anything, but as a serial entrepreneur being through co-founder issues, Gus, when I found Gus, I knew exactly that's exactly what I needed and wanted for co-founder relationships, like period. There's one other service out there and I won't even name them, but like Gus really does it right. When going through co-founder issues, you learn a lot about legal, insurance, financial, and taxes, and Gus provides that pretty much for you. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Again, we did not pay Skylar to be here. I very much appreciate that. I threw a link in the chat because some people asked in the questions too. We do have a free tool to guide you through the co-founder conversation, specifically about how much equity to issue each person. It's a helpful guide to just think about a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about right here. Who's providing what level of value? Are they taking compensation? Are they working full-time on this? Are they absolutely essential to the domain as opposed to more of a contributor or contractor that you could hire out at market rates? It's a great tool. We've built it based on data and valuations and tons of stuff that we've had over the years. So if you're at that stage, or even if you've started a company and you're thinking about bringing on a co-founder, it's a helpful resource. The bigger thing I like to get at, and something I've said many times in this is, I'm not going to give Delaware credit for this, but Delaware corporate law is the result of thousands of years of humans trying to figure out how to equitably work together. It's not perfect. Like they say with democracy, it's the terrible form of government, but it's better than all the rest. That's kind of the state of the world in terms of human business. And these contracts, while they seem kind of stuffy and, it's like, oh, like do the right thing. I'm a do the right thing kind of person. We'll make it right later. And Gust's original founder, or Gust's founder, David S. Rose, is the idea of contracts is like you make ironclad contracts, you put them in the drawer, and then you do the right thing. But the ironclad contracts are actually a lot of the guidance through setting up these relationships and the considerations. And as much as it's like, it's not the terms of art or the words in them, but rather it's like the process that you will go through in order to memorialize it in a silly little written document. That's the important part. And then what we try to speak to is like, it's actually really good hygiene to start to, figure out like, well, how much equity am I granting my founding team member? Are we just going to say 50-50 and we're both directors and like, we'll totally make it work? Probably not. Almost never. It's really not a good fit for that. Usually it's one person, like Skylar brought up, that is really just pushing this. They're the one establishing momentum, and that completely creates a different power dynamic. That completely creates a different, equity dynamic in the things. And those conversations are better to have up front than they are to find out when things are either going well or things are going bad. Like Mike said, things will go bad. It's almost guaranteed in startup life.
Leadership is so important in this whole thing. And that's one word that I don't think anybody brought up yet. Leadership. Like somebody's got to lead, and you have to lead the hard conversations and the good conversations.
I agree. And we advise a lot of, it's very popular out there to be like, oh, we're co-CEOs, or we're co-this, or we're equal owners, or we're both directors. And I'm not saying it isn't not impossible. I have seen companies that are literally run by people at the exact same stage in their life. They're giving it 100% all together. They're the perfect co-founder match, and there might be damn close to that. But 99% of the time, I do not think 50-50 split both directors or anything makes sense for a business. There's usually one person who's more obsessed with this than somebody else, and that is likely the CEO of the company. All right, let me hit some questions unless anybody has some hot thoughts. on that? All right, we'll do a real quick one because we only got 2 minutes. Mike, super fast on using the angel list and actually running a process. Any red flags or quick things that you would just say to look out for if somebody is in Jake Denton is in the exact same situation as you?
Be super clear about your expectations up front, and don't be afraid to pull the ripcord early. Start fast, start soon, and pull the ripcord early. Don't overvalue their contribution, right? That's something I did, is I overvalued their contribution. I didn't want to. I was like, we just started, let's keep going and keep going. And the longer we pushed it, the worse the problem got. And so pull the ripcord early, start and try and see how it goes. And you can always, they can leave and then they can come back and they can leave again, right? Like there's as many do-overs as you want. It's your company. You can make it anything you want. Contract is just two people agreed to something and signed the paperwork. You can make it whatever you want.
And I think that's another case for like contracts and good vesting schedules. Use the vesting cliff as a conversation point. Do not let that date just pass you by and be like, oh, I guess I'm a quarter vested. It's like, no, you should, honestly, you should be doing this once a month, if not every 2 weeks. But sitting down and saying, like, is this working out? Is this meeting both of our expectations? If the business is not building, if your career is not building, if whatever, it's so much more important. Then it's very easy in business, especially when things get awkward and things are uncertain, where people can kind of like defer that meeting. Do we really need to have this meeting? It's like, maybe we really do, and actually have this conversation so that there's opportunities to pull a ripcord. Let me see some other ones. I think I actually got most of them. A lot of people were asking about equity splits between co-founders. I threw the link in there, but CEO, you also shared the slicing pie stuff, which is also super useful. Any parting words, or let's go around the room. Can everybody give me like 2 more minutes? Nobody has a super hard stop. Starting with Skylar, and we'll go around. Just if you can put it down to one thing. What is a parting piece of advice you give for our audience about the co-founder quest?
It's a tough one. I mean, you just gotta, it's like life. Like life can have its good times and bad times, and you just gotta learn how to roll with the punches and put yourself out there, and how to get knocked down and get back up, or else just quit now. Frankly, like,
motivational.
Give yourself some time, just quit. If you're even thinking about it, it's a journey that, like, the co-founder one is it's either going to make it or break it too. The co-founder relationships, like, it's either going to make or break a company, and that's all there is to it.
Skylar, quit now. It's going to make or break your company. Now, I feel resilience in there, and finding that in both yourself as well as the people that you're bringing on board on that. CEO, what about you? If you could distill it down in one piece of advice to let a stranger on the internet walk away from who's looking for a co-founder, what would you say?
Communicate clearly and don't be afraid to talk about feelings.
Spoken from somebody who started a men's mental health app, for sure.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I have seen is co-founder therapy. Like, there's actual therapists who specialize this, and I know a couple of my friends who have, they're on their like 3rd venture, and they've had all these burns, and they literally start monthly therapy sessions with like the 3 co-founders, and they go in there and they just hash it out because maybe they lack the communication ability, innately, they walk away from stuff. So that is something that I've seen bear success. And last one, Mike, if it's not duplicates of the other points in here, what do you got? What's your one takeaway?
It's all going to be okay. Like, that's it. It'll be all, it's fine. Right. There's a very old business book called From Barbarians to Bureaucrats, which talks about how, like, different people are the right people at different stages of the journey, and everybody is a different fit at a different stage, right? Some people are the barbarians, which is needed at the beginning of a company. You're out conquering new land. The bureaucrats are needed at a different stage because Think of a IPO'd company like a cruise ship. You can't just turn that thing on the side; it'll tip over, right? Like your decisions have to be slow and take time and methodical, and right. There are different strengths and weaknesses to both of those, and so the same goes for people, right? So your co-founders are going to be the same thing, right? The right people today might not be the right people 6 months from now, 2 years from now. It's all going to be fine. It's all fixable. It's all adjustable. It's all going to be okay. So just start and know going in that it's fine. It'll work. It'll work itself out. You just keep trying.
Mike, are you telling me that I can't go acquire a multi-billion-dollar business, lay off 75% of the staff, and expect things to run just as normal in a late-stage startup?
No comment.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and a little bit extra time. This was a ton of fun. Thank you guys for showing up for this. It seems like people really got a lot out of this, and I really like events like this. We usually do education forward. We're a bit more planned and things like that. And try to like head things off. But this is great. I love the human element of it. I wish you guys all the best success, and I know the next ventures or the current ventures or what's going to emerge from all of you. And we'll probably have you back in other forums. Be on the lookout for this. We will send out recordings and various resources that we posted. And all the best to you all.
Thanks, Ryan.
Have a great week, everybody.
Ciao.